thanks for watching the Communicating with Legislators workshop recording. Appreciate you taking the time to get active with, or learn to get how to get active with your policymakers. First, we just kind of want to review what we're going to review today. I want to start by framing just who the Organic Farming Research Foundation is and who I am. Then we'll talk a little bit about the legislative process, a very brief overview. And then we'll really get into why direct engagement works with the policymaking process, some of the wrinkles that the Hatch Act provides in the advocacy world. And then we'll review a couple of examples of effective engagement from researchers with the policymaking process. The goals for today are, multiple. First, we want to really learn how to engage with policymakers. Then we want to learn about the opportunities that are available to engage with those policymakers. And then, learning about the methods and ways to make best of those opportunities to engage with policymakers. And lastly, we're really hoping that you all will make a plan and then take action and get engaged. So, moving into the first agenda item, Organic Farming Research Foundation, OFRF. We're an organization that's been around for over 30 years, and we have this mission to foster an improvement and widespread adoption of organic farming systems, and we really believe that organic farming is the leading form of agriculture that will lead to multiple benefits, both for the people that are employing it, the ecosystems that are being utilized to produce food, and then the economic systems that are on top of it. We work through or towards that mission in three different ways. Advocacy work, which is prime example is this workshop right now, but also we do direct engagement with policymakers, just informing them about the organic market in their states or districts, the research investments that have been made in their states and districts, and what that really means for the economic and social systems that are in their states and districts. Research is, I think, the biggest piece of what we try and do, and we do fund on-farm research through our farmer-led research trials program, where we support farmers conducting the research that they want to conduct, both through some small stipends that helps de-risk taking on some of these research projects, but then also a lot of back-end support when it comes to research design and implementation, and just making sure that farmers will produce some shareable results, and then how to share those results with their community. And that really ties into our work of education, which is both taking the research results from these on-farm research trials, but then also academic research that's being conducted at land-grant institutions across the country, as well as a lot of nonprofit organizations that conduct really action-oriented research, but sometimes that gets a little lost in scientific language. So what we really aim to do is translate this academic research and academic journal articles into action-oriented resources for farmers to really implement that research and make it real world. And like I said, we have 30 years of experience doing this work. Here's a lot of different things that we're doing when it comes to our research. And one thing I'm really excited about is this new online database that's expected to be launching early next year, where we'll be tying those academic journal articles and providing summaries of them, and just really digging into how to operationalize all of this research and make sure that farmers are being benefited from it. Then moving into my background a little bit, in the farming and food system context, I've worked on small polycultural specialty crop operations in the Northeast United States, as well as a vineyard and a local plant nursery while working in New Zealand. And right before I attended grad school, I was also working as a food hub delivery driver, delivering local produce that I would harvest at the small farms that I would work at, and then cook in the restaurants that I was also working at. So it really gave me a full perspective on, what a food system can be like, and that, these different ways of constructing a food system are real, and it's not just a theory anymore, but there are tangible examples. In the community and political organizing world, I worked for a climate justice oriented organizing campaign during the 2015-16 presidential cycle in New Hampshire, where we were really focused on electoral politics and climate policy related to just a restorative and just transition from our current systems that are fossil fuel based into something that is more renewable. And part of that also was just like general community development, right? Making sure that people with disparate backgrounds and different viewpoints can come together and talk about things that they might agree on. When it comes to the policy crafting work, before my role with Organic Farming Research Foundation, I was a clerk with the Vermont General Assembly's Legislative Council Office, where I was working as a legislative counsel, drafting agricultural, natural resource, and municipal law issues and bills for the legislature. And I was also an intern in Congress during the 2013-14 Farm Bill cycle. So that gave me some insight on how congressional offices work, as well as, the nitty-gritty details of legislative drafting. And then, as well as this, I'm the adjunct professor of law at the Vermont Law and Graduate School, teaching their legislative law course, which is really trying to detail that legislative process and the levers and actors that really make it work. And lastly, in the research and hard sciences, admittedly, this is the world that I'm most relatively new to, but I do now sit on the executive board of the International Soil Modeling Consortium, and I have generally been really interested in the intersection of how science influences policy and how policy influences science, and just really being able to bring that legal perspective to these scientific communities and spaces has been really helpful from my perspective. And, it's been really great being able to engage with the hard sciences in a way that I haven't been able to before. Great. And so that's a little background of me and the organization. Now we can dive into the content of the presentation. First off, it's the legislative process in a nutshell. So I think first we just want to like outline at the outset, there's three primary traits of a legislative body, and that's, a legislative body from everything from, federal Congress down to the like a city board, right? Or a municipal legislative body, or a county board, or even, the state legislatures. Those three traits they're reactive, they're slow working, and they depend on consistent input. And when I say reactive, that's really what I mean by that is that they're reacting to the ideas, the problems, the comments brought to its attention by constituents, interested parties like us at OFRF, and the groups that help, represent both of us. And that's, coalition organizations, professional societies, and the like that. I think it's important to really stress this point that, if a legislature doesn't know about a problem or an issue, then they can't act on it. And then, conversely to that, if they don't know that something is really important or really working really well, then they can't defend and support it, right? And that's really just to hit home that we need to just continue to communicate to legislatures at all levels on what is working and what isn't working, because that's what they depend on. And when I say slow, some of you might have heard the kind of legislative process analogy, that was the bicameral legislative process analogy that was put forth by some of the founding fathers, that the House is the teacup and the Senate is the saucer. And that means that there's a lot of different places to cool down the coffee, I guess is the way to try and make that fit. Um, so I'm just going to take you a little through the like legislative process in a very specific nutshell, that I'm trying to pack an entire semester's worth of legislative law course into about 5 minutes here. So please bear with me. So like I said, at first it starts with an idea, and that can come from me, it can come from you, it can come from legislative staff, it can come from anywhere. Then once that legislative idea is put forth and brought to the attention of a member that's willing to act on it, that idea is then translated into legislative language. And that's the role that I was playing in the legislative council position for the Vermont General Assembly. Essentially, it's a state assembly person would come forward and be like, I want to do this. And then it's the legislative council and other aides role is to take that idea and turn it into what it would mean in legislative language and statutory language, and really try and put that idea into reality rather than just in concept. Then that legislative language, if the member wants to introduce it, they do introduce that bill, and that goes to the full floor and then gets referenced to a committee. And essentially, a committee is just a mini legislature that is full of subject matter experts. Generally, the committee that we're most concerned about is the agriculture committees of both the Senate and the House, as well as the agriculture subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee. And once this committee deliberates that bill, amends that bill, and then either votes or tables that bill, if it gets voted out of committee, it goes back to the full chamber, where that full chamber has to then vote to say yes on that bill, no on that bill, or it needs to go to a different committee. And that is that next committee is something that is repeat as needed depending on the subject matter of the bill. And those subject matter kind of guideposts are outlined in official rules for each legislative body. And some things will have to go to multiple different committees, but some things fall under the jurisdiction of only one committee. And that, to kind of give some context, that's largely why the Farm Bill, they're largely reluctant to speak to farm labor, because farm labor actually falls outside of the Agriculture Committee's jurisdiction and falls within some of the other committees like Commerce. So it's just like a real world example of how that jurisdiction kind of both limits and provides opportunities to really get involved. And then once that full chamber votes yes on the bill, gets sent over to the other chamber. So for example, if the House has their farm bill, it gets voted out of committee, it gets voted on the floor, passes, gets introduced to the Senate. And then that Senate does the same thing again. And then if kind of by virtue of that committee process, that bill will have changed. And then what it results is you have the House bill version and then the Senate bill version. And then what is created is the conference committee, which is members from both of those houses or both of those chambers that are subject matter experts or just interested folks, and get involved in trying to consolidate those two different versions and create the single version, which then has to get passed in the full chamber again on both, because they have to be concurrent. It has to go from the House and introduced to the Senate, or the Senate introduced to the House. They cannot happen simultaneously, because then it's not the same bill that's passing through, but two bills that are kind of working alongside each other. Sounds like legal fiction, but there's lots of case law that actually prevents that type of action. Then once that bill gets passed by the House, passed by the Senate, it then goes to the executive body, which is presentment. And some in the federal context, that's the president. In the state context, that's the governor. In the city context, that can be the mayor. And it's definitely depends on the different structures of the legislative body that you're thinking about. But this is generally how legislatures work, right? And as you can see, it's slow, right? This takes a long time, and this takes over the course of usually multiple legislative sessions, that results in year-long, if not decades-long efforts to pass legislation. And it's not for the faint of heart, to say lightly, but I do think it's really goes to show that legislatures depend on that consistent input, right? There's so many steps here. There's so many opportunities for both input from folks that really support these things, but also input from folks that really challenge them. And organizations like us at OFRF and partners are responsible for making sure that legislators can get that information and the attention that they really need to support their action. But it really, one organization is great, but hearing from constituents consistently is how things move, right? And that's how movements are both born and won, is through just the consistent input and deep input as well. Like, it's not just sending a little text alert or anything like that, but it's like sending something that shows that you took the time to actually consider what you're saying. And that's something that is really important and kind of leads into the next topic, which is why that direct engagement works. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of story of self. And that direct communication of why you're a researcher, why you're a farmer, why you're interested in organic agriculture, why you're here in this workshop today, even is just you're trying to give a way to tie your own personal story to this larger narrative, right? This larger movement that's working towards a sustainable agriculture system, a system that is both just and helpful for the ecological, the economic, and the social systems that are being utilized. So you have the experiences that you have. I don't have those experiences. So just like making sure that you're sharing that information, experiences from your life with legislators and legislative staff is really important, because that's the information and kind of experiences and knowledge that decision makers really need to know for them to get spurred to action. Another great thing about that direct engagement, that story of self kind of concept, is you can really tailor the message to the listener, right? If the staff member or the legislator that you're meeting with or hoping to communicate with comes from a farm, you can detail that in that way, right? And make sure they couch things in messaging that really resonates with that. If they're a researcher or a PhD scientist, which some legislators are, being able to really get into the nitty-gritty details of the scientific literature is something that could actually be done, right? But then folks that might be completely brand new to the subject and never really contemplated organic agriculture or agriculture in general, then being able to tailor that message to the beginning stages is something that's really important. And again, the context that you're bringing it is also available to change, right? If you're going in, having a meeting in an office, your demeanor and how you speak is going to be different than if you are able to bring the legislator to your farm, right? That's just by both virtue of your comfort levels in those different kind of settings, but also just the vibe, right? Just the kind of what is going on in the context that you are in. And I think one thing that really hits home is that experiential learning lasts a lot longer than presentations or kind of handouts or anything like that alone. So if you can have the legislator themselves or their staff members visit your farm or your research plot or anything like that, that's how minds are changed. And we've heard that from legislative staff and legislators themselves that they didn't understand that organic agriculture was actually, a business model, not just some, hippie dippies on the coast trying to make things different, right? they're both two conflicting realities can exist at the same time. But, it's also one of those things where they finally understood that this isn't just a kind of set of priorities, but an actual workable business model that is providing economic growth in their district, right? And that completely changes their framing, completely changes how they think about these things, and potentially creates a really strong ally and even champion for our issues. Another thing for direct engagement, especially in this context, is just making sure that you're presenting yourself as an ally and resource. You're not trying to necessarily persuade right off the bat. You're just saying like, hey, I'm an expert in this field, right? Like I do research in this work. I farm. I understand how these markets work and how they affect me. And I want to make sure that you understand that as well. And I think one thing that a lot of people, when they think about Congress and they think about this policymaking process, is they really get abstract, right? Like Congress is a thing, it's not a collection of people. It is a collection of people. And staffers are generally young, they're generally underpaid, and they're generally overworked. They're very, very spread thin. Some of the staffers that we get to meet with and work with are working on issues as wide as, the post office funding, to environmental law, to veterans affairs, right? And they're expected to be experts on all of those pieces of information and topics. And one, that isn't necessarily fair to them. And two, they're really looking for help, put plainly. And if you can present yourself as someone that is supportive of the policymaker legislative's priorities and you want to help them get work done, you're going to potentially get an email every now and then. You might get a call from the office. You might, get some outreach to say like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what are you hearing about this? And because these office staff members are, really, really spread thin. And there was some polling done in 2022 of congressional staffers, and only about 11% of staffers were found to be satisfied with the resources at their disposal to do the work that they're assigned, and only 6% of the staffers were satisfied with the level of staffing. And that just goes to show that these people are really worked hard and really worked overworked. Yeah, I'll just put it there. And I think that really like translates into there's high turnover rates. Some of the offices that I've been able to work with OFRF, over the past 2.5 years, we've seen 4 different staffers working on the agriculture issues, and that's something that is really hard because that institutional knowledge quickly disappears. But then also the relationships with that staffer disappear, right? And that's really, if you can suggest in meetings, if your relationship with the office is getting better, just really suggest that you are included in exit memos for staffers in this area. That's something that we've done at OFRF and we've been very successful at. And when new staffers come online, sometimes they'll reach out to us and be like, hey, y'all were mentioned in our exit memo. I'd love to set up a meeting and get to know the issues, right? And that's great, right? That's getting to the point where our relationship with that office is now at the level where we can both be like collaborative ally rather than just, an advocate. And that's something that is ultimately the goal of what we're trying to do. And then, lastly, that just the effectiveness, right, of that personal engagement, those personal visits in DC, the in-district meetings where legislator staffer might visit your farm, or even, taking the moment to send a piece of mail rather than just an email or a phone call have been found to be effective, right? Over 80% effectiveness of just the impact of that communication. So, this just really goes to show that, social media alerts and those other types of communication can be effective in some regards, but if you want to like have a outsized impacts, trying to take that time. And even if it's, 5 minutes to jot something down and send it over, that's something that will help. And now the wrinkle of the Hatch Act. As I said, the real goal here is to just become an ally of the office and, provide that education role rather than the really making sure to have a specific action or anything like that, which constitutes lobbying. But, I definitely want to be clear, right? If there's any researchers that are at public universities that are watching this, y'all are government employees, which means that there's really special rules that apply to what you can and can't do using your individual versus your university role. All of us have a constitutional right to engage with the political activities, as long as you do it on your own time, do it without use of university resources, and keep records showing 1 and 2, right? Making sure that you can provide information or receipts or whatever information is needed to show that you did not use public dollars to engage in this process is important. Sometimes you can use your title as a professor, sometimes you can't. It really depends on the rules of your institutions. Sometimes just like a disclaimer that's along the lines of like title for identification purposes only. This endorsement is made in a personal capacity and does not represent the views of University X, right? Something like that in any outreach is helpful. But I think the biggest thing is just reach out to government relations office or government affairs office for your institution. They have worked to really cultivate strong relationships with policymakers in the states and districts that they occupy, and they already have a lot of the connections or knowledge that you're looking to establish, and they'll oftentimes be really excited, that a researcher is wanting to share their research with a legislator to make sure that they understand the impact of some of the policies that they support, right? If you do want help reaching out to your government affairs office or anything like this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email will be at the end of this presentation. Feel free to reach out with any questions or anything like that. And yeah, I definitely want to kind of stress this like advocacy versus education work, right? The advocacy is asking for specific action, which, is lobbying, right? Saying like, can you sign on to this bill? Can you appropriate dollars to this project or program, things like that. Whereas if you're simply letting the legislative office know that my research project in District B has been going on for the past 2 years, and here we finally have some like preliminary results that I'd love to highlight to you and show what we were doing for the district, right? That's very different. That's just letting them know about something that's happening in their district, and that's generally allowed. But again, reach out to your government affairs or government relations office and have that conversation. Some ways to get involved with the policymaking process. Again, reach out to your government relations office if that's applicable to you. But then there's also, reaching out to legislative offices, offering testimony, both verbal and written, and then providing some letters to the editor for your local news outlets. I think that direct outreach is generally what we think about when we're talking about communicating with legislators and providing, this type of work. But that is the call to the office, the writing a letter, the writing an email, inviting to your farm, sharing the impacts of your research, just making sure that you're a resource for that and an ally for that office. Offering testimony, that's a little bit more detailed. That's actually one of the examples that we have is a researcher offering some testimony to a state regulatory process. And that's just both, you have ability to do verbal testimony, like awesome, please take advantage of that opportunity. That is a really rare and impactful way to provide information. But then there's also, written testimony, which is, provided on the record and makes sure that, if certain things are done, you can point to the record and make sure that the information was available at all times to the legislators that are trying to act on it. And then lastly, that letter to the editor. I think that's something folks discredit a lot, right? Like letter to the editor, who the heck reads that? Like, why is this even like still a thing in the modern day and era? And studies continue to show that letters to the editor, or the commonplace, whatever an outlet might call it, is still one of the most frequently read sections of newspapers. And legislative offices are constantly looking for ways to get their fingers on the pulse of the community, right? On making sure that they're understanding how their constituents are feeling about different issues, especially local issues. And my time in interning in Congress, one of my tasks was actually to look through letters to the editor, and if there were repeat subjects week to week, or multiple letter to the editors on a certain subject, I'd bring them to the attention of the legislator, of the congresswoman. And that really shows that these things do matter. And if you can get a full conversation going on in the public space, that's a really high impact way with pretty low kind of level of work to make that high impact. If you want help writing that letter to the editor, definitely reach out. We won't go over the details on how to do that right now, but always helpful to do some practice and proofread, and just work with someone to make that as strong as possible. Yeah, now we can talk a little bit about a couple of examples of effective engagement. Dr. Eric Brennan of the Salinas, California station, the one all the way to the right in this photo during a recent congressional visit with Representatives Zoe Lofgren and Jimmy Panetta visiting the research plot just to see what was going on. But this example of engagement is Dr. Brennan's comment on a California Ag Order 4.0, which is a regulation about agricultural runoff for nutrients and pesticides and other kind of general agricultural chemicals, right? And Eric provided a great 10-minute public comment during the open comment period, both based on his research and others' research in the areas that just show that utilizing cover crops and composted materials provides a different result than the regulations scientific assumptions that were being made at that moment. After that 10-minute public comment, there was a period of deliberation by the board, and that board unanimously voted to adopt those changes, right? And that then immediately led into Dr. Brennan establishing stronger multiple trials to demonstrate simple and effective ways that farmers can meet the regulatory requirements of their runoff through the growth of cover crops utilizing compost. And that really just shows that policymaking is an inexact process, and sometimes when they're operating with incomplete information, they'll think a regulation will be helpful, but it really is harmful to the community that is most impacted, right? And there's a lot of different examples of this, but I think this is a really great example in a recent development, especially around the issue of agricultural runoff, which has become more and more prominent as we understand and regulate our point sources through the Clean Water Act. Another kind of example of some farmer engagement is Steve Ela was invited to, a farmer from Colorado, was invited to provide public testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee on research programs. He provided some detailed written testimony about how he's been impacted by research programs and how research programs help both him and his community of farmers that do operate organically, but also those that operate under conventional operations, right? And they are also utilizing organic research products, and it really just goes to show how impactful a farmer story can be, rather than someone that does this government relations type of work for a living. And Steve has definitely been continued to be a resource for multiple offices, especially the Colorado delegation. If they have questions about certain bills, if they have questions about certain topics, they'll reach out, and then Steve has that opportunity to really have that ongoing research, like ongoing relationship, right? And just provide resources and perspectives that are important for the office, and someone that's collaborative and wants to work with the office. And if someone reaches out, he will generally reach out and with something supportive, right? And even if it's saying a no, he'll provide justifications for why they shouldn't support things or whatever. And I think reviewing what made these engagements really effective is important, and something that we can learn from, right? If you look through the materials that both Dr. Brennan and Steve Ela provided, signposting is kind of prominent at the very beginning, and that's really just providing, you're about to tell the audience whether you're about to tell them, right? And that's just providing, these are the big subjects I'm about to hit. I'm now going to hit them. They had that personal connection. They really, appreciated the opportunity. They appreciate the work that's been going into the, policy or recommendation, and they try and make it a human thing rather than just that abstract policy making thing, right? The venue, both obviously high impact venues, public comment, live testimony, those are some of the highest impact that you can have. The visual kind of pieces of Eric Brennan's testimony were very helpful in, again, showing legislator or kind of the regulatory body on how their regulation is going to affect farmers, right? And showing and not just telling. And then during their verbal testimony, there's consistent callbacks to the written materials that they both submitted, but then also providing the data when data mattered, and explaining why that data mattered, right? It wasn't just saying like, look, this is how things go, this is how we're going to do it. It's providing like, look, this is how things go and here's why, right? And here's the justifications, and not just expecting folks to accept them at their word, but really laying out the work. And then at the very end, I think the biggest thing is it just lays out specific actions to amend policy, right? In Dr. Brennan's comment, it provided, a specific, like, here's how to address this. Here's how to make this regulation compute with reality on organic and sustainable operations. In Steve's testimony, he really, provided some actions that are needed to support the organic and sustainable agricultural research industry, and just making sure that we're investing in the programs and the subjects that really need to be invested in. So yeah, and I think the last thing is just really it's all about sharing your story, collaborating with others, and supporting others. It's making sure to communicate how you can, and if that's sharing with organizations like OFRF, your story that we can then amplify and utilize through our work, that's incredibly helpful. If it means, sharing your story directly with representatives, that's incredibly helpful. I think the biggest thing is that you're just sharing your story and having it out there in the public sphere, because that's ultimately what's needed to, again, generate those ideas, which then kicks off the whole legislative process. Collaborate and support. I think, that old adage of if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, really fits here. This work is not done by one, it has to be done by many. And again, because of that consistent input and that slow process of legislating, we need to collaborate with others, right? Like this whole system has been set up with the assumption that collaboration does and continues to happen. And that is something that we need to continue to do, right? And that's how both resilient change comes about, but also smart change, right? Not just whiplash, but well thought out, and something that's going to address a lot of different problems simultaneously. So with that, I just want to thank you for taking some time to watch this presentation. And if you have any questions about this material or anything about getting active, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email's right here, gordon@ofrf.org. Our website has lots of great materials, and we'll soon have more ways and avenues to get active in this space. So yeah, just appreciate it.